At this point, you're probably scrunching up your nose, folding your ears back, and rechecking the cover of this book to make sure you're still reading the Wasteland Survival Guide. Once you confirm that you are still reading this book, you probably take another look at the table of contents to make sure this actually was a part of the book and not just a few pages of a history book stapled in by the previous owner or by the strange ghoulish mare you bought it from. You know the one. She had that pretty mane. But now that you've gone through all the motions and realized that the Wasteland Survival Guide is giving you a history lesson, you're probably harboring some strong feelings of annoyance towards me. Just let me explain. The Wasteland Survival Guide is a mostly practical book about surviving in the balefire apocalypse with only a toothpick and curtain. Which reminds me, I should test that method. I'll have my assistant come over when I'm done writing this. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Silly Ditzy. I'm a big believer in understanding the past to understand the world we live in now. How did everything get to be the way it is? Why are certain groups of ponies behaving in a certain way? And what ponies don't like other ponies? You'd be super surprised to find out how useful this information all is. So, with that out of the way, let's get started on the alliances of the Great War. Now, the reason for understanding who was allied with who during the war is that, even today, it affects the upbringing and traditions of many ponies. You might not know why the Minotaurs hated the Centaurs, but you definitely know that you are a Pegasus and you hate the Earth ponies, zebras, and unicorns. So what happens if some poor traveler comes by looking for your help and he has a zebra companion? Why, you might end up looking like a big old butthead to him, and no pony's going to be happy. But if that pony's read the Wasteland Survival Guide's chapter on Great War Alliances, then he'd know to let the zebra wait at the door before speaking to you. Now let's get started! We're going to step back 200 years to the Great War and take a look at major players and factions. Obviously, there was Equestria and there were the Zebras, the two largest and most powerful factions. The war revolved around these two giants, and it was at their behest that other nations began to join the war. During the early days, Equestrians worked to gain the support of the Buffalo, sending Rainbow Dash, who had a rapport with them, to handle the negotiations. Despite Dashy being a pretty awful negotiator, her history with them meant that they were more than willing to join what they expected to be a few small skirmishes. Yeah, going into the war, none of our allies actually thought the war would go on for longer than a year at the most. If even that. Boy, were we surprised a decade later when our kids were marching on the front lines. Anyway, the Equestrians found allies in the Centaurs as well, a fairly remote tribe close to zebra territory. They were a fantastic double threat, having the strength of their lower horse legs to pull heavy objects, but also having incredible fine manipulation skills since they had these awesome things called fingers and thumbs. They could be far more precise with dealing with complicated technology. Unfortunately, because the Equestrians had Centaurs on their side, the Minotaurs joined the Zebra purely out of spite. They'd been having their own feud with the Centaurs for hundreds of years, and whilst it rarely ever fell into violence, the hatred was still deeply rooted enough for the Minotaurs to feel as though they had been passed up in favor of their enemies, and they were willing to go to war over it. Now, the Griffins were a neutral force during the war, acting as mercenaries in the same way that they do now. Their culture had a strong focus on money and wealth. It would be difficult to get a Griffin to do anything for you without paying them first and then paying them again afterwards. So when the war started and mercenary work became a valuable trade, the Griffins fell into it pretty comfortably. Of course, they had their own internal affairs to handle at first, since the Griffins were already a divided group at the time the war started. Most ponies are familiar with the place called Griffinstone, which is where most of the Griffins they've met come from since it's nestled pretty deep in the equestrian territory. But it's not actually the homeland of Griffins or their longest stronghold. Nope, the Griffinstone monarchy is actually a splintered group from the Skyfeather Republic, a much larger nation of Griffins which still flourishes today under a totally different system of government to which we ponies are used to. But that's a story for another day. Yakistan chose to remain neutral, having had their fill of war after their last attempt at declaring war. The Yaks were nestled firmly in the mountains, and the trek would have been too difficult for invading armies to risk taking. I haven't been there since the war ended, so I'm not sure how they're doing. Maybe I'll go check it out sometime. You still with me? We're almost done, and then we'll have a chapter on something super exciting like bombs or guns as a reward. Now let's go into the Shetland Isles and Shireland. These islands lie between the zebras and the equestrians, and they made life really difficult for any naval forces trying to ferry troops across. They wanted nothing to do with our war, but rather than surround themselves with natural defenses like yaks, the island ponies climbed into their ships and started sinking invaders whenever they passed by. They gave the ponies and zebras so much trouble that they actually had to launch a joint assault on the isles, working together to crush those who they thought were upstarts. It was the closest we ever came to peace, and maybe if we had won the battle, we would have seen the benefit of working together and found our way to peace. Alas, that didn't happen. Nope, not at all. And the equestrian and zebratian forces were crushed by the islanders, who had the home ground advantage as well as a much more experienced naval force. Now, just to add insult to injury, once the islanders were finished defending their homes, they sent their fleets out to the equestrian city of Trottingham and the Zebratian Cape Coast to set fire to both of them. After that, the zebras and ponies sailed a wide berth around the islands when they were on invasion missions. Alright, we're on the last one now, and this one's... well, I don't have a lot of information on it, but I'll do my best. Let's step back a little further before Equestria was founded, when their homeland was being frozen by the Wendigos. Now, here's a question for all of you. What happened to our original home? During the war, the Ministry Mayors sent some of their best agents to the original home of ponies to banish the Wendigos from the land. And, of course, they were successful, though I'm not entirely sure how. I've been trying to dig up that information, but the terminal entries in the Ministry buildings has been difficult to gain access to. They only refer to the mission briefly as the Ossus. I've chosen to include this portion as there is certainly a faction of ponies that assisted during the Great War living in the old homeland of Equestria. But it seems like I'll have to do some research on them first. And I know just who can help me with that.